Hello, everyone, and welcome to Book Talk. It's great to have you join me today and to get to introduce you to my friend, Melanie Dobson. And you will enjoy getting to meet her because she writes a genre that is near and dear to my heart, World War II fiction. Melanie, would you like to take a moment and introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Kara. It's such a delight to be here today. I am a writer, like you said, of time slip and historical and a little bit of romantic suspense fiction. I've been doing this over 20 years now, which is hard to believe. So almost 30 novels out there. But my passion is just to tell story. I love stories. I love sharing them. I love when I finish a book and how God just ignites and sparks a new story. And so that's a super fun process for me. My husband works at an organization called the Bible Project. And so we live here near Portland, Oregon is where our home is. I grew up on the East Coast, Ohio, actually not too far from you. But we're living in Oregon and we've got two girls. One is 19 and she's in the Navy. And my youngest daughter is a senior in high school now. So we're in the midst of all of that, coming up to graduation here.
That's awesome. That's so fun because you're looking at quite a life shift if you've got one that's 19 Navy and then a senior. So 30 books though, that's quite a milestone. How did you get started with World War II being kind of the hook or the anchor for most of those, even if they're time slip and coming in and out of that time period? What drew you to those stories and that part of history?
Yeah, I love to write stories. I like to say I like to write stories about seemingly ordinary people who do extraordinary things, particularly those people who, kind of everyday people who risk their life to help their neighbor and love their neighbor. And you see that repeated throughout the World War II era, those 1940s, when people were just doing these horrific, or not horrific, people were doing horrific things. And then you have the people doing heroic things. So you've got just both of these, the good and the evil. And just being able to dig and find these stories. So many, as you well know, so many people didn't share their stories until much later in life, or even after they passed away, people are uncovering them. And so just finding these stories, having somebody share it with me, finding a newspaper article. I mean, my whole Memories of Glass book was about this gentleman. He was a principal at a local school, and he and his colleague next door, who was oversaw a nursery, and his other colleague across the street, who was made to oversee the registration at a deportation center, the three of them worked together to save 600 children from the Nazis. And the Nazis never found out about it. And he didn't share his story. I mean, it was till much later in life that this started coming out. And he was 107 when I started writing the book. He was still alive, which was pretty remarkable. So I knew I was sharing this. He knew I was sharing the story. But you find those gems, you find these people that just do these heroic, amazing, incredible things. And I just want to share. I want to tell their story.
That's awesome. And I think it's incredible. That's almost like a Schindler's List type of story where you've got these very ordinary people, a school teacher, a school principal, someone who's running a nursery, and someone who's kind of you would say almost like the middle of the lion's jaw, standing there and holding it open and going, let's get these children out. And then finding that story and going, okay, more people need to know about it, but you're not writing a nonfiction book, you're writing a novel. So you're wrapping story around historical events. How do you find that balance between you're not writing a newspaper account, but you're writing a novel? So how do you find that balance between story and what actually happens?
Yeah, and I love that question because it is a balance. Like I can't just report the facts and do the interviews. I interview extensively when I write my books. Do a ton of sort of a research junkie. I just love to just dive in. I could research and never write a word, but I have to write. And so I research for about a month and I find the stories, I get that out there. But the difference between the nonfiction, of course, and the novel is just that emotional connection. I want my readers to be able to engage emotionally. You can't always do that in nonfiction, especially when people have passed away. You don't know what they were thinking and feeling and, all of that. So I could take some of these real life characters and in Memories of Glass in particular, I have Johann von Holst was his name. So Johann is actually a character in the story. But most of my books are inspired by real people. So the book that came out last year, for example, The Winter Rose, it's set in southern France, and it was inspired by a number of Quaker women, in particular American women, who went over during the Spanish Civil War, stayed there, and began rescuing children during the Holocaust out of France. And so that was inspired by a number of women. So I was able to create a character then of some very real life people, and then just kind of expound on that, take their story, take what they may have been feeling and experiencing, what I certainly would have been experiencing and feeling, and then just show in one person a whole group of people who did some really amazing, heroic things. And so I think that's the advantage of being able to do that. I started out as a journalist. That was my original job, when I first started out of college. And I enjoyed it because I enjoy interviewing people and getting the story. But I kept finding that I wanted to kind of expound and write a little bit more. And, oh, this would be so interesting if this happened, and this would be so interesting. And being able to get the sensory information in, and the sights and the sounds and the smells that are so important to a great story. And it just realized it's just my natural bent to be able to take these stories and create fiction, create novels out of them.
Yeah, and I think that's also one of the reasons that the history piece of it is such a hook for you, because you do bring that nonfiction journalistic bent to it, but then you add the layers, the emotion, the putting us in the location. So it's this beautiful blending of both kind of disciplines in a book. And so we're there, we're in the middle of it. It's like we've been transplanted, but it's not a documentary. Our emotions are engaged as well. And that takes a gift and putting us in the middle of it. So has there ever been one of your books where you almost had to walk away from it because you got so emotionally invested in it that it was almost too heavy, and because you're writing about these people who are in really trying, horrible, World War II was not a pretty time, especially in Europe. And so there was a lot of really darkness kind of coding over that part of the world. So have you ever had to kind of walk away for a while because it was just too much, and then kind of come back to it when you got a little bit of distance?
Yes. Yeah. And I am actually in a walking away period right now. So it's really interesting that you asked that question. I had to do that years ago. I wrote a book called The Black Cloister, and this has been almost 15 years ago. And it was a book about a religious cult. And it was that was probably my hardest book to write, emotionally, just really challenging book to write. And so there were periods in writing that book that I did have to step away just for my own emotional health, and then came back. I finished the book and published it. With World War II fiction, I wrote World War II fiction for about 7 years, pretty straight. And that is a long time to have your brain in the Holocaust. It really is, because as in you too, we feel everything because we're novelists. And that's what makes writers, good novelists, because we can feel it. And then we write about it and invite other readers invite others along our journey to feel as well. And so that's an important trait, but it is so hard just to feel that consistently. And so after Winter Rose came out last year, I took a break, and I have been out of the World War II era for about 1.5 years now. And my next book, I just finished copy edits last week. My next book is going to be Gilded Age. So it's a different, different setting for me, a different era. And it was really, really healthy for me. Still a lot of drama, still a lot of conflict, within the story, but just a little bit of a different era for me to kind of recover emotionally myself as I want to communicate well and feel. I want to feel the feels. I want to feel everything that my characters are feeling. And then I have 2 more novels contracted, and I think my one after that will probably be a return then to World War II. We'll see.
And I think that's really healthy in a way, to be able to kind of step away, get a little distance so that you can stay emotionally invested, because otherwise you almost have to put up some barriers and a little bit of distance so that you can stay healthy in the process. But then that creates a distance that the reader can feel, where it's a little more reporter-esque I know
Yeah.
that's not really a word, but it's more of I'm reporting the events versus feeling it. And when I think about like the World War II books I've written, to a large extent, there's been a distance because they were largely in the States. And so the sheer brutality of the war was experienced differently than if you were in Europe. And the book that was in the war happened in Europe. I have very intentionally not written about the Pacific because I know I can't go there because it was very brutal. It was a very kamikaze type of approach to the war. And I know I can't go there because of how I feel and experience everything. But one of the novellas I wrote this summer is set in Germany right after the war. It's with the monument in Germany in August through November or / December 1945. And that was very different because the war's over, but Germany was decimated. Like some of the cities were 90% destroyed at the end of the war. And so I'm writing about the orphans and I'm writing about all of that. And I was kind of glad it was 30,000 words because the heroine's dealing with seeing all of that, but it's also what the monuments meant. So she's seeing it and she's wrestling with what she's called to do with it, but there's still a little bit of distance because her days are with the art. And then when she's traveling to and from her apartment, she's wrestling with but I'm seeing this and God, what are you asking me to do? And how am I supposed to be dealing with the devastation that's around me? And then she's back in almost the cloister of, and then there's this art. How are we supposed to be dealing with this? And so even then there was kind of this little bit of ebb and flow to being exposed to all the destruction. And so it was still a little bit of, I guess ebb and flow is really the way to
yeah, it's a burden. You kind of carry it with you as you go around throughout your day.
Yeah, but it wasn't in her face all the time. And so, but then I'm writing about the art today because it's like I'm not embedded in it all the time. So Gilded Age, that would be okay, now I'm coming up and I'm breathing and it's a little lighter. But was it Gilded Age in England or New York or what part of the Gilded Age have you sunk into?
Yes, 1907 was the year, so kind of at the end of it, New York, and some of my characters are British, but it was a really fun story to write, and I needed something fun to write because it's up in New York, and so New York, the North Country, so the St. Lawrence River, as you probably know, goes right up the north, and then Canada's on the other side, and so it's where the line is between the boundary between the two countries. But in that river, there are almost 2,000 islands, and they call it the Thousand Islands. Yeah, so it's called the Thousand Islands, but they're actually like 1,800 islands, almost 1,900.
Somebody sat there and counted them all.
Yes, they have counted that yeah. So, but back then they thought it was just 1,000, I guess. And so it's so fascinating because during Gilded Age, the New York society, mainly the new money, because the old money went kind of like Rhode Island or Connecticut or those kind of places, the new money would come up to the Thousand Islands area and they built castles, very, medieval European full-on castles and all sorts of mansions. They had Fifth Avenue, they called part of the river, because it was just mansion after mansion after mansion. So just so intriguing. It's a beautiful place. The people are amazing. And the stories there, it's just like countless stories that have happened. And so my story is about the book is called The Wings of Poppy Pendleton. And so I have little Poppy's little girl, and she disappears when she's 4. She disappears from her castle, and they don't know what happened to her. And so it's the time slip novel where then I have somebody 90 years later who starts to uncover her story and find out what happened to little Poppy. And she was such a joy to write about this little character and Poppy's story, I call it, and just immerse myself kind of up there in a different era, just a beautiful place. And yeah, I absolutely loved writing that book.
That's so fun. Although, it's not fun that a 4-year-old disappeared, but
yes.
But it would be a fun detour from what you've been.
Yes, it was a really fascinating story to write, and yeah, and just dive into those characters in a different place.
And so, yeah, that would be refreshing and just kind of a fun change of pace with your writing. So when you're writing, you said that you spend like the first month doing research and kind of dive into the setting, the characters, the what if. What's next? How do you proceed with a book? Are you a pantser? Are you a plotter? What
Mm,
comes first for you? The characters, the plot?
yeah, I'm such a middle of the grounder, I guess. So, I don't, my process is a little bit different with every single book as far as the inspiration of it. Winter Rose was inspired by something I was writing up post mostly World War II story called Curator's Daughter in Germany, like you. And while I was researching that book, I stumbled upon just a little bit, that little bit of information about what the Quakers were doing in France during World War II. And so I hadn't read a book about that. I mean, when you find something like that, it's like a little gem. You start researching, has anybody written about this? What's out there? And so that inspired that story. And so sometimes I'll get like a little gem like that. Sometimes I will kind of get a picture or like a character. When I was writing my book, Catching the Wind, and this was a few years ago, I was actually at a coffee shop in my little town, an old house. I love old houses, and was looking out and actually praying. I'm like, Lord, I need a story that I need to be able to write. I have this proposal that I have to get out. And it was this old, they call it a weeping cedar tree that was outside the window. And I just kind of had this picture of this little boy and this little girl in a tree house there. And I knew it was like 1940 or 1939 in Germany. And I knew the kids were going to have to run away. And that's all I knew. I mean, I just had kind of this picture, and the whole book just sort of unfolded from there for Catching the Wind. So sometimes it's a little piece, sometimes it's a story somebody will tell me, about their family. Sometimes it's something I find in a newspaper article. So I'll take kind of a little bit of that idea, and then I will brainstorm the characters. It's really important for me to know my characters. And so I'll spend a lot of time. I'll do the 16 personalities test. I'll do the Enneagram. I mean, I do like all these tests. I like really get to know my main characters. And so that way, when I put them, okay, I know it's going to be an American Quaker woman. This is her personality. This is what she fears. This is what she cares about, kind of put all of those little things in there. So I know what direction she's headed. And then that from there, the story sort of unfolds. And so then I'm pretty much a pantser at that. Once I have my characters, I have a little bit of a plot. I have the beginning usually. And then I just kind of watch the story unfold. And I wish I could outline it all. Some of my friends, like, Sarah Sundin and others, are so good at outlining. I love that. And I wish that I could do that. But for me, the joy of the process is the actual unfolding of the story as I work. So that's what I do. What are you a pantser? Are you a plotter?
Done both. So when
Yeah.
I started writing, my publishers required the chapter by chapter. So I've done that. And then the writing's so easy because you're just going, I know exactly what's coming, and I just go, and it's really easy. And so some of that's kind of intuitive now, where I know what has to come. But like I just turned in a book. I actually just got the edits back today, the macro edit for a book that on October 6th, I had to do a hard pivot. The book I thought I was going to turn in on December 1st, I couldn't because of it happened. And so on October 6th, I had a 1-paragraph idea. I didn't even have a hero.
Oh my goodness.
January 1st, I had to turn in an 85,000 word book.
My goodness. Well done.
Yeah. So I mean, I had literally a 1-paragraph idea.
Wow.
And she's like, wow, you did it. And I'm like, I did.
I did. I need to sleep for like a week.
The normal, but it's actually, I'm really proud of it, but it was a lot. I mean, I gave myself 3 weeks to find the idea and to figure out, like, I didn't have a hero. I literally did not have any idea for the hero. I had a couple paragraphs on the heroine, and that was about it. Sort of had an idea for the plot, sort of, but it was like a paragraph, like even that much. And so I was like, and I have an idea, and I don't even think I had an idea for the prequel. I now have an idea for the prequel. And so I need to put that out this week, as I now have till February 27th to write the prequel and do the macro edit on the book.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But this is book 40 and the prequel is book 1. And so, I mean, I can't tell you how many people I told, I'm so glad this is book 40 because I was stressed, but I wasn't panicked because I'd written 39 books. So I was like, I have a process. And so I knew if I took the time to know the characters, so I took October to know the characters and to do the research, I knew it would come together. And I knew, because I'd worked with editors enough, I knew we could get it all ironed out. But it was like, it's going to be a little stressful. So that was the week between Christmas and New Year's, I wrote 24,000 words.
Well, congratulations. I know that makes, I'm gonna have a nightmare.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do it every book, but you can do that every once in a while. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well done.
Yeah. So I guess it depends on the book. It's ideally, I'm kind of somewhere in between like you. I've learned to do the character work because if I don't, then I hit about the third way point and it's not working. And it's usually because I don't know my characters well enough. And so it just isn't quite gelling. And so it's a hard way to back up. And if it's not gelling, it's because something's not working on the character level.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I do. I've learned to write in thirds. That's kind of how my process is. Everybody's process is different. It's so fascinating to me, but I have to, because I'm such a pantser, I write the first 30,000 and then I'll edit that, I'll edit that for myself, kind of a macro edit. Then I'll do the next. So I have the 60,000 and I'll write, I'll edit all that. And then when I have it ready to go, I'll do my last third, because if not, I don't know where I am at that point. I'll write 30,000 words and I have no idea, solid ending. And so that helps me set up that foundation and then I can finish the book.
Yeah, that's a really great strategy. I think that there are times, usually it is right about that 60% mark too, is where it's like, I need to kill somebody. The plot's starting to fall apart or there's not enough tension. Or like this one, because I had to write it so fast, when I sent it to the editor, I was like, because I write suspense, I was like, okay, I know the suspense isn't quite working yet. And so I could say, okay, I know the suspense isn't quite working. And because my next book is going to be more of a traditional legal suspense, like a courtroom one, while I was waiting is I actually was reading and dissecting Randy Singer legal suspense.
Oh,
so I could get that pacing in my head. So as I'm going back through it now in the edits, that pacing's front of mind. And so even some of those kind of tricks where when I'm like, okay, I know the edit will be coming back and I know this is something I'll need to work on, but because I let my editor know that I know this is a weakness, she can look at it and she can either agree with me or not, but then I can be working on strengthening my technique so that when it comes back to me, hopefully I'll have a few more tools in my toolbox as I'm then looking at it. So historicals are a little harder too, because you don't necessarily have that tension, but like with the legal suspense, I was literally I was doing an audiobook and an ebook and going, oh, this just happened at the 25% mark. Okay, so I need to make sure when I'm going back over it at the 25% mark, this is happening, or those kinds of things. Here's all the internal conflict that was happening inside the law firm at these different points and things like that. So
that's brilliant. That's brilliant to just go and do a case study like that on a novel that you really like and really works, to be able to then take those techniques and move it over to your story. Yeah.
Yeah, because how many Christie Awards did he win? I'm like, he was doing something right. So
it's great.
And my next one, I want to be like, hey, Randy, do you want to brainstorm with me?
Okay, I love it. And he'd say yes.
Yeah, he would. He totally would. I'm like, I should actually do that.
You should.
If you could spend a day with any author, who would you pick?
Oh, what author? Oh, can I pick two?
Yeah, absolutely.
Pick a shoe, because I don't know what I would do. I would probably go to Jan Karen's farm. I think she's in Virginia. And I have had so much admiration for her work. She writes very different kind of fiction than I write, but I love it. It's kind of like her books, I call them like comfort books. It's kind of like comfort food for me, the Mitford series. I think she does such a brilliant job with the characters that she writes, and you just feel like you know them. They're like your friends. And I would love to just kind of spend a day and just kind of talk about her process and how she created all of these characters. And then my other one is Kate Morton. I really like her. She does time slip fiction as well. And I think she's a seat of the pantser from what I've read, a lot of it. And she does a lot of it. She writes these huge novels, if you've seen her. Yeah, they're huge. Yeah. But she does a lot of it by hand, which I also think is interesting. So I would just, her time slip process is really fascinating to me, and the mysteries that she does. And also I think she's in England. I think she goes back and forth between England and Australia. So, there's that, which would be really fascinating. So yeah, I think those two ladies would be a really fun for me to spend the day with either or both.
Yeah, but when I was reading Jan Karen's books, I thought the same thing. They're just comfortable. And Father Tim and all of that. I was like, not that I would ever want to write like that, but they're just fun. It's like you slip into a town that you would want to live in, and they're just comfortable. And then, yeah, Kate Morton's books, the twists and stuff at the unexpected ways. I'm like, man,
Yeah.
there's a lot you can learn from her on the plotting and the twists and the way she puts it all together. They would both be wonderful and fascinating.
You can come with me. We'll go. Both of us will go.
It'd be so fun. Okay, and one last question.
Yes.
I'm terrible at this. How do you celebrate when you finish a book?
Oh, I'm terrible at that too, Kara, because I like clean my house. I mean, it's not really a great celebration. I'm just so relieved. And like, usually my house is a disaster by then, and my office is a disaster. I just kind of want to get my life back in order. I think, it's hard for me to be so in a story and kind of do the life around me that I need to be doing. So I think I just get my life in order that. And sometimes we'll go to dinner, or do something like that. I think the other thing, as you well know, with the book process is like, you get your book turned in. Yay. That's great. That's when I kind of clean up my life. And then it's like, you get those developmental edits back. It's like, oh, another celebration. And then this copy edit was a doozy for me this past week. And so, I want to celebrate that. And then, and then the book comes out and it's another celebration. And so I don't have a specific way that I celebrate, except for getting my life in order. And then the fun part of writing for me is the dreaming up part. It's so fun to get things in order and then just start thinking, oh, what's next? And being able to come up with a story. So I think the biggest celebration is probably just being able to start with a new book and start dreaming again.
I love that, because I tend to be a workaholic. So I think I'm like you, and then I'm like, okay, that one's done. So now I can get on to the next one. And people tend to be like, that's just more work. And I think I'm realizing that no, for me, that actually is like the sign that, yeah, there's something new and it's shiny and it's fresh. And
exactly. It's life-giving.
And realizing that can be a celebration, that can be new and fresh and fun, and that's okay, and that's good. But I'll never forget Allie Pleiter would always be like, she would get a new charm on a Pandora or something. And so she's like at 80 books or something now. So I'm like, does your wrist like
right?
Because you've got so many of them now. But I was like, oh, that's cool. Because there was something like tangible that she'd do, like, I finished that book. Now I've got something new to celebrate that. And I don't do that for a while.
That's a great idea. I love it.
Yeah. But I was like, by the time I heard that, I was like, that would be really expensive if I started now. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been so much fun to catch up and to help introduce the listeners to your books and your writing. And y'all, if you have not read Melanie yet, you really need to, because she is a wonderful writer and just has a passion for these stories, and you will not be disappointed if you give them a try. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.